Have you ever watched anything you feel kind of bad about consuming? My name is Mage, this is Black and White Thinking, and I love watching trashy reality TV.
They told me that David is dead.
At this point, I have consumed it for decades. A habit acquired as a child that has stuck with me well into adulthood. From Big Brother, especially the so-called celebrity version in the UK, I loved that, all the way down to things like 90 Day Fiancé in the US. Reality TV draws me in. Classic rich girl shit like The Simple Life to modern rich girl shit like The Kardashians. From the setup and scripted to the full documentary. True crime Discovery Channel propaganda has basically become my go-to background noise. You guys know Catfish, right? God, I love Catfish. I've seen every episode and there are hundreds.
Bonnie, this is the
That's
red flag.
Red flag.
No, but it's right here. Bonnie said,
Can you see this? Wait, maybe he's colorblind.
I
Wait,
can't
what
even
color
see.
is this?
There is something a little voyeuristic about the whole experience, and I guess I'm a social perv who just can't look away. The ethics of the entertainment we consume are often hard to grapple with, at least when you're an everyman normie. Rich people don't really care. I'm not talking about the specific people, but more the amalgamation of iffy within genres. We know that supporting Woody Allen is bad, that giving Joanne Rowling money, knowing that that money will be used to support bigoted norms and causes, is bad. We all know that, and how we choose to deal with that is a personal choice, one we all have to live with. But what does a whole genre of dodgy look like? And how do I, specifically, deal with it inside my own heart? As someone who grew up poor, queer, and surrounded by evangelical teachings, I definitely have some ideas about why I personally consume a lot of this television. However, there is a level of nuance to this conversation around ethical consumption, and there are questions within this conversation that I just do not have the answers to. As an avid consumer, however, of a lot of reality TV, there is one specific aspect of the genre that does take up space in my mind more than perhaps any other: the use of children as main features in these shows. As I say goodbye to the last remnants of my own youth, the issue tends to weigh heavier and heavier on me. I mean, I'm not the one putting kids in these positions, but I do want to talk about this issue in this video. It also gives me an excuse to talk about reality TV shows I have way too much knowledge on for absolutely no good reason. So first, let's look into some of the more obvious, perhaps more well-known examples of terrible parenting, and the exposure of children to things that they do not need to be exposed to, before I go on a Fundy Friday style rant about evangelicals and Mormons and that one reality TV show that very much still owns my arse. And yeah, this will definitely be a big one, so buckle up and grab some tea or whatever your beverage of choice may be.
Don't cry. Don't. Dry it up. It's okay. It's okay. You were amazing. There's nobody can take that from you, okay?
I wanted that car. That's on my fault.
Some quick housekeeping. If you like this video, then please consider, liking it, subscribing to the channel, watching any of my other videos, letting me know what you think in the comments, telling me what to make next. Always like hearing your ideas. You can support the channel at any of the links below, including at my Patreon. And this video has a sponsor, so a quick word from them. Thanks for everything, guys. Truly. This video is sponsored by ExpressVPN. So yeah, we finally have a sponsor at Black and White Thinking, and I am so grateful, and I would like to take a moment to introduce you to them. ExpressVPN. As someone that covers a lot of American TV on this channel, all the way from the wet and windy UK, I often have an issue accessing the content I need in order to make my analysis. That is where ExpressVPN comes in. ExpressVPN is obviously a VPN, and a VPN is a virtual private network that allows you to send as much information online without the risk of it being intercepted. ExpressVPN will also give you access to a unique IP address that, as I said, can stop nosy people from your ex all the way to the government from accessing your data. Using ExpressVPN can also allow you to gain full access to the subscription services that you pay for. Take Netflix, for example, who block what you can watch depending on your location. A subscription to ExpressVPN allows you to access streaming services and content from all over the world, wherever you may be. They also have an option for for mobile access, which I have found super helpful recently as I have been flying to mainland Europe a lot. There is nothing more annoying than downloading things on a streaming site to watch on a plane home, only to be blocked from watching things you paid for because you're in a different country all of a sudden. ExpressVPN solves all of those problems. ExpressVPN also works as security for all of your internet activities, making it harder for your internet service provider, and also, again, the government, to access your browsing history. Personally, that might be the most important reason to me to have access to a VPN these days. ExpressVPN can protect you on both private networks at home and public ones, such as a coffee shop and library, where people can access your personal information really easily. ExpressVPN goes further than other VPN services, with the fastest speeds because of their premium servers, which allows them to be consistently faster than other providers. They have 24/7 customer support, a live chat, which means your questions will be answered almost instantly. And as I previously mentioned, they have an app and you can connect to your private IP address with one click. It makes your life on the internet easier, cheaper, and safer all round. If you want to get access to ExpressVPN, then check out my link below. By using my link, especially made for black and white thinking, and those of you that watch, you will get your first 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. So I definitely think it's worth considering. Thanks again to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. I can't believe it. Wild. Check out that link below.
I really didn't like the idea of being grounded, and I didn't like it more when I knew what it was.
Here Comes Honey Boo Boo first aired on TLC in 2012, a spin-off of the infamously tragic Toddlers and Tiaras, a show following pushy parents and their pageant-attending children, the odd little boy but mostly little girls. Here Comes Honey Boo Boo followed the titular Honey Boo Boo, real name Alana, a girl of 7 years when the first episode aired, and her family. Her mother June, her father Mike, known as Sugar Bear, and her older sisters Anna, Jessica, and Lauren. Alana and her mother turned head in the episode of Toddlers and Tiaras that they appeared in for being, well, fat white trash. And I'm allowed to say that because it's true, and, well, you know, I'm also fat white trash. From Alana's over-the-top catchphrases,
When Mama said we was going to Six Flags, I was so excited I almost came out of my skin. That would be weird. I would be riding around with just in my bones.
and June's questionable parenting choices, not limited to, but including giving her 6-year-old a concoction she calls go-go juice before her pageant performances, a drink made up of Mountain Dew and Red Bull. TLC saw dollar signs and decided to give Alana, June, and the rest of the family, by proxy, their own television show. Honey Boo Boo, the show, is a proverbial mess, one I have watched every episode of. Filmed in quick succession, 4 seasons across 2 years, the show follows the family through all of their so-called redneck adventures, including questionable hygiene choices, bad southern cooking, a teen pregnancy, and the adventures of Alana's pet pig. The family, as most families do, had their good about them and their bad. In regards to the better, they were pretty open to other people's differences, including having members of their family who are gay and embracing them, which definitely bucks the stereotype of what people expect to see from a southern lower-class family on television. And they were proof that that stereotype is antiquated. In regards to the worst, Mama June is a mess. A kinda crappy parent, and has done very little to learn from her own trauma in order to give her children a better life than she had. She is an addict, both with drugs and with the worst men imaginable. Sugar Bear was the best of a bad bunch of men that she dated, and he is a lazy loser who cheated on her. And whilst the show has an amalgamation of issues, namely, why the fuck does TLC do the things they do? I want to focus on what is generally known as poverty porn, and how exposure on this show throughout the years has affected Alana's and her sister's childhoods throughout the years. Poverty porn is a term that is kind of hard to find the origin of specifically. I couldn't tell you 100%, even after much research, who invented the term. It seems that the earliest recorded usage of the phrase comes from an internet review of the 1999 film Angela's Ashes in a film review newsletter published by Danny O'Brien. Regardless of its origins as a phrase, poverty porn has existed for far longer than its academic definition, and it refers to, on a grand scale, the depiction of poverty in any form of media in an incomplete and gratuitous manner for the entertainment of the non-impoverished. The term is particularly popular in its use amongst British academics, as a response to the very British obsession with white saviorism and the villainisation of the lower classes. There is a lot of poverty porn in classic British literature, in Hardy and in Dickens, even though their collective works hold a profound and important part of British culture. We can see it in British films made about non-British people, usually in countries made up of people who are brown and black, like Slumdog Millionaire. We see it in things like Band-Aid, The Single, and Live Aid, The Concert, where good intentions and money raising were used to ignore the root causes of poverty in places such as Ethiopia back in the 80s, and again in the early 2000s. And British reality TV has a big obsession with poverty porn. There are an endless list of British TV shows that essentially ogle the poor, and they put them on TV to entertain the Daily Mail reading middle class, Middle Englanders who enjoy knowing that they will never be like those dole bludgers, those pikeys, and those benefit cheats that they choose to look down on from their high horses. Here Comes Honey Boo Boo is poverty porn at its finest. And although we are going to get into the personal and prevalent issues of June and her family, a lot of the backlash, especially originally for the show, comes from classism and one of its closest allies, fat phobia. The show and the family are presented in such a way that those that find themselves lucky enough to not be living in a glorified shack next to a train line can look upon these conditions and 1, be glad that that is not their own reality, and 2, judge June and her family for how they do live. The show, at its heart, is exploitative, much like the rest of TLC's back catalogue. But Honey Boo Boo finds itself in the fairly unique position of centering Alana as the main character of the show. A little girl who is barely legal now and who knows nothing but the reality of growing up on reality TV. This exposure of Alana, the money brought into her family and then taken away, we will get into the whys of this show being cancelled in a little bit, this exposure has shaped Alana's childhood and that of her sisters. Alana being younger and the Honey Boo Boo in question has arguably probably been affected the most. When the show finished, her parents had split up alongside it, and this essentially led to the breakup of her entire family. After Honey Boo Boo, Mama June was given more reality TV, more exposure by the vulture media and critics who enjoyed calling her a bad parent, but did nothing to help her become a good one. And Alana, a literal baby girl, was dragged along for the ride. Mama June was given a weight loss show, Mama June from not to hot, and through this, Alana's eating habits and health were also made public knowledge. Her weight and appearance scrutinised and picked apart by fully grown adults and for the voyeuristic viewing pleasure of the greater, mostly American public. Honey Boo Boo was seen as fair game. She wasn't seen as a person, but as a thing, to be judged, laughed at, and to be poked fun of on Saturday Night Live and South Park. Audience members and critics found it easy to absolve themselves of any wrongdoing for this phenomenon, laying the blame solely at the feet of June and not the circumstances and society in which June was a part. Now, June has done some truly terrible things, and I'm about to get into them and talk about the cancellation of the show and the custody rights she doesn't have over her own daughter, but none of that negates the complicity of TLC and any potential complicity of the audience that watches the show in the public humiliation of a little poor girl who was forced to grow up with cameras in her face. The show, on a lot of levels, is a lie. All the shows we talk about today are a lie. But in the case of Honey Boo Boo, it is specifically a lie when it comes to the concept of social growth or mobility. A place on reality TV does not equal the playing field in regards to the class in which the Thompson family found themselves. If anything, putting them on camera made it much worse. That's how poverty porn works. There is no attempt to do anything about the poverty, to help the people affected by it, the children affected by it. It is a joke. The cast of Honey Boo Boo are monkeys, and we, the audience, are watching them throw shit at each other at the zoo. TLC removed the agency of Alana, of her ability to make informed decisions, to have a well-rounded understanding of her upbringing built on anything but shame for our consumption. I want to share an excerpt from the book Talking White Trash, Mediated Representations and the Lived Experiences of White Working Class People by Tasha Abdon that I think discusses this way better than I could but it's also incredibly personal, and I relate to it a lot to the feelings around the complicity we may have in our own class oppression, on the need to hide your roots as an impoverished lower class person when you are also interested in academics. I am 30 years old, seated on the bright red couch in my living room, my eyes glued to Here Comes Honey Boo Boo, a popular reality TV show that follows the adventures of a child beauty pageant participant, Alana Honey Boo Boo Thompson, and her white working-class family from the rural town of McIntyre, Georgia. Clad in a ruffled pink gown plastered with sequins, Alana prances across a brightly lit stage, and I see myself in her routine. According to Giraud, 1998, Stealing Innocence, The Politics of Child Beauty Pageants, a majority of contestants who enter local pageants are from working-class families, driven by mobility fantasies and the lure of a small cash prize. Alana Thompson is no exception to this rule. Her family's dreams of mobility are couched in pageant performances. Where pageantry is their potential source of mobility, academia is mine. I exist in a liminal space between the white trash and the educated elite. I twist and turn in a ruffled pink gown through the halls of the ivory tower, and no one knows what I look like without my costume. My identity for the past 15 years has hinged on presenting a middle-class person, one driven in part by problematic media images of white working-class people, fostering in me a yearning to pass and dissociate myself from the class I actually come from. As I watch Alana and her family, my reaction is mixed. I am repulsed when I can tell producers have amplified their bodily functions and featured clips highlighting various grotesque-seeming flaws, such as stained, ill-fitting clothing, mispronounced words, and unhealthy foods. To me, this is poverty porn, an invitation to voyeuristically gaze upon the supposed failings of those who struggle to make ends meet, placing the viewer in a superior position, separate from those failings. This angers me because it exploits and makes a mockery of the white working class, robbing them of their dignity by encouraging us to laugh at rather than sympathise with them, and the adversity they face due to systematic issues. As viewers, we are invited to recognise that Alana will never be a beauty queen. Her failure is what makes the show entertaining, and this makes my blood boil. Here Comes Honey Boo Boo was cancelled in 2014 after Mama June, having split with Sugar Bear, who was found hitting up both genders on dating sites whilst they were together, decided to reconnect with an old boyfriend. This old boyfriend was a registered sex offender and child abuser. A child abuser whose victim, it turned out, was Anna, June's oldest daughter and Alana's oldest sister. This was where TLC drew the line, which it should have, but this is also hypocritical because TLC was far quicker to cancel Honey Boo Boo than it was any of the other shows we are going to discuss in this video, which incur many of the same problems around the safety of children. Anna never really got over her initial abuse or the betrayal of her mother, rightly so, and my heart breaks for her. She was let down by the person who should have protected her, and when this news broke, June was more concerned with the cancellation of her show than she was with her own daughter's feelings and trauma. This was the moment, truly, that June's parenting went from questionable at best to downright inexcusable. After getting kicked off of TLC, as I mentioned before, June found a new show on a new network that focused on her weight, where they paid for a gastric bypass and she lost a lot. She presented herself in a new light, or at least the cameras attempted to, and this led to new kinds of attention. June would then find a new boyfriend who was almost, but maybe not quite as terrible as the child molester. Her new boyfriend, who she was with up until last year, the year before, Gino, is an abusive, to June specifically, drug addict who did nothing but encourage the worst behaviour in June herself. The two of them spent years on drug binges, stealing the money for said drugs, as the shows June had featured on faded into the background. This storyline was documented in part of From Not to Hot, but June wasn't often in the picture. It was all about her children. She had, and has, all but abandoned Alana, eventually signing over the parental rights for her youngest child to her third daughter, Lauren. Lauren married young and had her own children, much like her mother, but was able to provide a more stable environment for her sister. The neglect suffered by Alana, because of a combination of poverty and having her childhood aired to the world, is pretty obvious. I am always reminded of a scene from Not to Hot, where Lauren has to teach her 15-year-old Alana the importance of brushing her teeth. Alana, now still only 17, has been dating a 21-year-old for the last year, who not only is committing statutory rape by being with her, was also accused and arrested for statutory rape before they even met. The damage done to Alana through neglect, classism and misogyny is wholly immeasurable, and there are no definitive signs that she will break the cycle her mother found herself in. And there is far less chance of escape for her because of how she was used as a prop on a television show, because of how her trauma has been memeified, and how normalised mockery is when discussing the show and her family. All of this only made far worse by the prevalence of the internet and social media. There is no way for Alana to navigate the world as anyone but Honey Boo Boo. And I'm no mental health professional, but I cannot help but imagine that forcing an identity this contrived onto a young child will only leave Alana with a myriad of identity issues as she moves into adulthood. Hilary Levy discusses this plainly in her article, Balloon Boy +8, Children and Reality Television, which was published a whole 2 years before Honey Boo Boo appeared on screens. So I will leave you with this quote as we segue into our next horror story, which is really not far removed from this one. It is also important to think about how reality TV forces its child stars to perform exaggerated versions of themselves to please their parents and other adults. Given parents' apparent willingness to allow others to edit and shape their children's real identities for a larger public in pursuit of status and financial benefits, even the greatest child star of all time, Shirley Temple, only ever played fictional characters. How might reality TV participation impact the kids' on and off-screen presentations of self? In a sense, parents are taking away their children's ability to shape how others will see them, both now and in the future. As we move on to the next chapters of this video and the examples from shows I'm going to use, I feel like it's kind of important to discuss a few things. The rest of this video is going to discuss Christianity pretty heavily and what it's like to grow up in a Christian family, especially one that is either fundamentalist or evangelical, or both. I want to be honest about my own background, and I want to make something very clear. Just because I'm going to be talking about a lot of Christian families, this is not an anti-Christian video, although Christianity is a little anti-me. This is simply a reflection and hopefully an introspection about the consequences of Christian shame. I come from a historically Irish Catholic background. My family obviously live in England now, as you can tell by my awful accent, and neither of my parents are prolific churchgoers, but this is our background and it has very much influenced the ways in which we have lived our life. I am a baptised Roman Catholic and a lot of those ideas kind of haunt my adulthood. I enjoy a connection to certain parts of Catholicism whilst abhorring others. I do not worship in a traditional way, and I personally identify as a practicing pagan. I have an altar, I do spells, I read cards, I carry crystals, and I leave offerings to deities. I have a lot of feelings around comparative religion and mythology, and sometimes amongst the gods and occasional demon I choose to worship, Jesus Christ exists. I love Easter so damn much, and whilst I tend to follow the neo-pagan Wheel of the Year, I still participate in Christian holidays from a cultural standpoint. When I was a child, piss poor, queer and fat, I also happened to spend a lot of time in evangelical church spaces. In my hometown, there is a huge evangelical church with a lot of power that uses the guise of community service in order to recruit and convert people. They held a lot of groups for local children incredibly cheaply, and local people, religious or otherwise, would lap this up as free or again, cheap childcare. They held youth groups and offered opportunities to the poorest demographics in town. I once won a trip to a huge local theme park for bringing the most friends to a church service. It was a simple technique to get more people to go to church, and it worked. Sometimes I would be at this church 3 or 4 times a week, all the way from being a small child to a teenager. I would sit there and listen to the incredibly graphic retellings about how Jesus died for our sins, and how acting on gay thoughts would make you a heathen. They were a test from Satan himself, and they must be resisted. I would watch youth pastors fall to their knees praying and singing in tongues, tears streaming down their faces, encouraging us to be reborn and baptized, and let the love of the Lord into our broken hearts. It was a remarkably American experience, considering I'm so bloody British. To say this instilling of shame didn't affect me would be a lie. It did, in an unmeasurable and deep way. And honestly, I think it inspired a big part of my obsession with reality TV. The examples we're going to discuss all follow Christian families and their children, who are not really children in most cases now. They were all around my age and dealing with similar things. The shows I will discuss were all on in my childhood and only either ended recently or are still going to this day. I guess there was a part of me that was unpacking a lot of my own trauma, so to speak, through watching these shows. And it's not lost on me that by watching these shows and trying to understand some of my own religious issues, I might have been contributing to the exploitation of other kids' religious trauma by proxy. So yeah, this is not an anti-Christian video, but I am going to get honest and reflective about what damage can be done by growing up religious and on TV, and specifically the kind of shame that can come with the things children growing up in these situations have to hide, the shame that can be instilled in them at a young age, and how, unlike me, this was amplified for children who grew up with their lives being watched by an active audience.
Gotta get up, Jacob.
Little People, Big World first aired on TLC all the way back in 2006, and it still airs to this day, following the day-to-day lives of the Roloff family. Mother Amy, father Matt, and children Jeremy, Zach, Molly, and Jacob. And as the show continued over the years, the children's partners and their own children. TLC loves a family with a perceived quirk, and Matt and Amy were a dwarf couple, with 3 tall children and one who was also a dwarf. Outside of the size of their parents, the family is pretty average, Christians living on a farm in Oregon. The show follows the children as they grow up, the challenges of Amy and Matt's marriage, and focuses particularly on how different or not life is for people with dwarfism. As a family, the Roloffs are perhaps one of the least problematic on our list of examples, generally. Matt is a bad husband, but he's an okay at best father. He is selfish and imperfect, but many of us are. He doesn't actively abuse his children, and you can tell he loves them. Amy does everything she can for our family, even when she is also imperfect. She is loving, she attempts to repair damage in the relationship she has had with her children, and she attempts to be reflective on her own decisions whilst doing so. She is also a great grandmother, and it's clear that her grandchildren adore her. As parents, however, Amy and Matt definitely have favourites. Or maybe it's better to say they have a least favourite, which feels cruel to even note, but feels unfortunately true at the same time. And whilst they may not mention it aloud much on the show, and are definitely the least preachy of the religious families we will be discussing, they are Christians, evangelical as far as I can tell from the information that they have given over the years. The combination of being the black sheep in a Christian family growing up on TV did incredible emotional damage to their youngest son, Jacob, over the years.
I think Jacob has been kind of a little bit of our lost child. I mean, he's the youngest. Amy went back to work when he was, 8 years old, kind of at a prime time. And with the older brothers and the older sister, Jacob has kind of been left a lot to his own.
The oldest children of the Roloffs are Jeremy and Zach, firstborn and twins. They are both adored by their parents. Zach particularly had a lot of attention because he was the only child of Amy and Matt's who also had dwarfism, and this meant he required a fair amount of medical intervention as a child. Amy and Matt were and are very protective of Zach because of this. The twins, being the twins and the oldest, held more power in their household than their siblings. Molly, the child born after the twins, was the only girl in a household of boys growing up on a farm, and this also meant that Amy and Matt had a habit of overcompensating in their parenting with her. They were clearly worried that the twins wouldn't have enough attention because they were twins, and they were worried Molly wouldn't have enough attention because she was a girl, so they made sure to take extra steps to ensure that any extra time or energy that they had to give as parents was dished out between their older children. Jacob was the youngest and the most disregarded in terms of his parents' attention, and perhaps sometimes even their love. This never felt like a purposeful decision on Amy and Matt's behalf, but it definitely happened. As the older kids were treated with respect, Jacob grew up in a house where he was constantly left out and his feelings were undermined. The show started out when he was about 8 or 9, and he was always painted as the naughty one throughout the show. He was often framed as disappointing his parents by not listening to their, sometimes overbearing in my opinion, asks, and he was constantly shown to be little more than an annoyance and potential punching bag for his older siblings. Again, it's clear that this family loves each other, even with all of their personal tensions over the years, but Jacob definitely drew the short straw, and he was the youngest of the Roloff children to be on television by a good few years. Whilst his siblings did have time before the show aired to enjoy a fraction of their childhood, Jacob did not really. He was on TV from a very young age, up until he decided to leave the show when he became a legal adult. Now, Jacob's behaviour over the years was definitely not what his parents clearly wanted, and it was obvious that he acted out at moments throughout his childhood in a way that seemed to rile up his parents, that was distinctively different from the way his siblings' behaviour seemed to impact their parents.
We need to do a better job as parents, and we need to help this boy understand that what he is doing is not a healthy thing, it's not appropriate, and we have to help rein him in.
It was silly things, mostly, that lots of kids do without the impact of camera in their face. He would steal his sister's phone to text his girlfriend, or he would have big fights with his older brothers that they would almost always win. He was always a little sad, a little outside of the scope of his family, and over the years you could see Amy not understanding why this was happening. The Roloffs, generally, would write off any minor behaviour issue in Jacob as him being the youngest, and just like that, just Jacob. However, there was a lot more going on, and the impact of Jacob's time growing up on Little People Big World was to blame for a lot of his emotional turmoil, as well as growing up in a Christian household where he felt a lot of shame around expressing himself. And this is not pure speculation on my behalf. Jacob has a blog where he has previously talked a lot about the effects of growing up Christian on TV. Jacob was molested by a member of the crew of Little People Big World for 3 years, from around the age of 10 until he was a teenager, which, Lord, hurts to even say. Just as we discussed with Alana and her sisters, when a child is on TV, they are exposed to a myriad of bad actors. Those in the audience with nothing better to do than bitch about children online, but also an exposure to the adults who work at TLC, who do not have the best interests of said children in mind. When Jacob left the show, he revealed his abuse to the world, and whilst he lays no blame at the feet of his parents, he does feel like growing up on TV as a Christian with strange people in and out of his childhood home was potentially part of the reason he was put at risk. Jacob, constantly lashing out and crying for help as a child, had no way of expressing to his parents exactly why he felt that way. He did not feel safe to do so, and a combination of both religious pressure and the impact of growing up with a camera on him constantly was why he felt that way. Jacob himself also understands that his childhood and the trauma that came with it was also the consequence of the capitalistic society in which the show was filmed. His life was a product for TLC to sell. He was forced into, essentially, child labour. He was forced into many situations for which he was unable to consent. Jacob has written many blog posts and essays discussing this. He had the following to say in his essay, Language for Reality Television, posted in 2020. Firstly, I believe that the entire edifice of which I had been a part should henceforth cease to exist on the basis that the selling of people's inner lives for the vicarious living of anyone is a dystopian manifestation of capital in entertainment. The instantaneity of possessing information which came with the internet and social media has fundamentally changed our perceptual goalposts for which informational bits we are lacking, and thus owed until we possess them of others. From vaguely knowing some names and characters, reading sparse interviews, we began watching interviews and picking out the idiosyncrasies that piqued conversation and intrigue in these base people, their names and said characters. More interviews, talk shows, more interviewers, more reporting, more conversation, more consumption, more profit. The capitalistic process unfolding. Jacob's story is a harrowing one, and the fact that he is doing as well as he is right now, living happily with his wife off screen, is a credit to him and him alone. It is evidently clear that his parents loved him and his siblings, that they still do, but Amy and Matt were naive in their understanding of the scope of the show. They definitely did not purposely put their children in a position to be violated in their own home, but they also did very little to try to understand why Jacob behaved the way he did, why his emotions were so unregulated, and why he had such trouble communicating. And this is not separate from their Christian background. Amy, more so than Matt, but still both of them, raised their children to believe in God as the ultimate creator of all things, and did not instill in them the correct language and behaviours that they needed in order to protect them from monsters. Within the religious framework that Jacob was raised, he was told he didn't have problems, that the only people that did were non-Christians, and that Jesus Christ, the Saviour, would absolve him of all issues in his life. The paradoxical reality in which he was forced to live, where this clearly was not the case because horrible things did happen to him, must have damaged his psyche to no end. And again, Jacob discusses this himself at length in his essay, What Religion Are You?, from 2017. I'm not going to harp on about the Roloffs and Jacob too much because ultimately I think Amy and Matt tried. I know Jacob doesn't want too much rumination about his childhood, and he is also clever enough to discuss this himself. However, I will leave you with some of his words, some more of his words, instead before we move to the next real example. An example where the parents involved definitely do deserve more visceral anger, in my opinion. So here are the words of Jacob Roloff from 2020, taken from his Instagram, where he discussed the abuse he suffered and the potential consequences of growing up on television. It is often much easier to think about things than it is to talk about them, and this disclosure has been delayed, but through that delay I found the fortitude and words. As a child, after what I now realise was a long grooming process, I was molested by an executive field producer for Little People Big World, Chris Cardamone. I do not expect to provide details of this encounter at any point publicly. I do hope he is never allowed around children again. I first began contemplating this statement when he texted me years later in November 2015. I choose to disclose it now, as it remains a traumatic memory that needs to be exorcised of any further power over my development. By revealing this, I may be more fully understood, and my perspectives on issues such as child sexual abuse, child exploitation, and the collateral cost of reality television may be received more clearly. Although I would have to add, this experience has not solely defined my point of view on any of these issues, nor has it defined my worldview in general. This also may serve as a reminder that the experience of sexual assault in all its iterations can happen to anyone at any time, and is a far more prevalent reality than our current social stigma allows us to talk about. Why not speak sooner? A child must process, and I needed silence and time. I continue my own contemplation of the voyeurism involved in the entire enterprise of reality television, a massive spectacle of drama and pain and argument and invasion, with a little joy sprinkled over, that viewers watch completely disassociated from the complex humans in simplistic characters they see on TV. Yet there is no inherent causal connection between reality television production and childhood trauma. We are still sprinting ahead with the enterprise deaf, dumb and blind, asking for forgiveness later, instead of asking harder, preliminary questions of ourselves. The profits were indeed sweet. The actual experience was far more complicated. I often ask sincerely, from this complex perspective, is it simply taken for granted that we should be capable of watching someone grow up week by week on TV? How does that environment of prying eyes, both lens and audience, affect self-perception? How are material amenities weighed against the subjective psychological effects? Has anyone defined these lines? Studied them? Should we need to study it? So much of reality television is simply a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. It must be fully emphasised that all the fault lies with the predator, and no fault lies with any of my family members. I see that this is a positive moment for me, and another step towards a brighter future, in solidarity with silent survivors. Jacob Roloff.
I think the world is definitely, as the Bible says, 6,000 years old.
It's pretty obvious once you start looking into it. What's really would be more, factual.
It's actually more scientifically proven than billions of years old.
17, and then 18, and then 19, Kids and Counting first aired on TLC in 2008, following the infamous, and I'm not even gonna lie here, damn awful Duggar family. Father and self-proclaimed patriarch Jim Bob and his wife Michelle and their 19 children as of making this. When the show first aired, it aired as a one-off special, and they only had 17 children at the time. The special did well in TLC terms, so the channel greenlit a whole show following the family and their daily God-honouring activities. Their children, and I had to Google this, I could not do it off the top of my head, in order of birth are Josh, a nonce, Jaina, John David, Jill, Jessa, Ginger, Joseph, Josiah, Joanna, Jedediah, Jeremiah, Jason, James, Justin, Jackson, Joanna, Jennifer, Jordan, and Josie, which, in my humble opinion, might be more white trash than anything Mama June ever got up to. Sorry, that's kind of mean, but I don't know how to be nice about the Duggars. They are crappy parents and even worse Christians, and boy are we about to get into it. Also a show that I watched a lot of as a child, less so as an adult, for I hope soon to be obvious reasons. As I mentioned in the previous examples, the prevalence of abuse in these families, whose lives are aired on television, is, well, pretty prolific. From Anna, Honey Boo Boo's oldest sister, being molested by her mom's boyfriend, to June essentially abandoning Alana altogether, to the producer who took advantage of Jacob Roloff and his parents' kindness and naivety, it is everywhere. Now, I wouldn't like to say that the abuse in the Duggar household is worse, because who am I to judge abuse by such a scale? However, it often feels more insidious and dangerous, partly because of how the Duggar parents, Jim Bob and Michelle, have chosen to enforce their own beliefs on their children, and the lengths they have gone in order to protect a predator who literally lived in their home. Jim Bob and Michelle are not only incredibly boring in literally every way possible, they are also conservative bigots, who go far beyond the average right-wing Christian to push dangerous ideals out into the world, and they gain fame and money whilst preaching a genuinely anti-human rights culture. Firstly, I think it is important to separate the Christian values of the Duggars from, say, that of the Roloffs. The Roloffs do not preach, at least not on their TV show. They have an almost blink and you'll miss it kind of Christianity that is more of a personal practice, specifically for Amy, because let's be honest, Matt is a cheating loser who clearly does not live by any real Christian values. The Duggars' so-called Christian, definitely evangelical, I think technically independent Baptist values are easily proven to be more dangerous. And this is where I might start to serve Jen over at Fundy Fridays. Sorry for pissing on your lawn, Jen. I love your content. I will link Jen's channel below if you want to know more about any of these Christian fundamentalist families. She covers it a lot, and in a hilarious way. So the Duggars are big followers of a man named Bill Gothard and his teachings, leadings, homeschool program, and a way of living known as the Institute of Basic Life Principle, which when mentioned throughout I will simply refer to as IBLP. Bill Gothard is a famous evangelical preacher and leader. He is also a predator, stepping down from his role as leader of his church after 30 plus accusations of abuse. And he is also, if you were to ask me personally, a cult leader for all intents and purposes. I'm not the only person to think this. It's pretty well agreed on by most people who don't practice the ILBP way. Bill Gothard's teachings are misogynistic, and by that accord specifically dangerous for young women, of which the Duggars have many in their home. ILBP teaches that women and children are meant to be seen and not heard, that they are lesser than men, and that men should only answer to God. The whole purpose of ILBP is to encourage women to be subservient and weak, to obey their fathers and husbands, and ignore any of their own needs and personal will. And the Duggars, they take this shit very seriously, in all aspects of their life, and specifically their parenting. They're also big into the quiverful movement, or again, way of life. That is essentially anti-birth control. Coming from a misinterpreted quote from the Bible, many followers of ILBP and the Duggars specifically believe that you do not choose when you have children. They believe that God does, which is why they have so many children. They are not only anti-birth control in their own life, with Michelle getting pregnant almost instantly after the last child was born, but they are also anti-birth control for everyone. They have a history of spouting non-scientific nonsense around birth control, including calling the pill an abortion pill that causes miscarriages, which is so inaccurate it makes me angry. The quiverful movement removes all choice from women and those that give birth, and tells them that the removal of said choice is a choice in itself. A description better than mine can be found in Laura Harrison's and Sarah B. Rowley's paper, Babies by the Bundle, Gender Backlash and the Quiverful Movement, published by Johns Hopkins University. The movement derives its name from Psalm 127, which considers children to be a heritage from the Lord, and compares them to arrows in a quiver, with which believers may face their enemies. Quiverful members are evangelical Christians who eschew all forms of birth control as interference with God's divine plan. Women, in particular, are encouraged to sacrifice their bodies for unfettered reproduction and to submit to both God and their husbands, who are their earthly masters. As well as being misogynistic, the Duggars are also homophobic, transphobic, and they have an awful habit of parentifying their own children. Because they have so many kids, Michelle cannot keep an eye on them all, and Jim Bob doesn't have to because he is the so-called patriarchal leader of their family, and their religious practice gives him a free pass from parenting. But with that many children and no way to look after them all single-handedly, Michelle has loudly and proudly employed a buddy system over the years within her own home, where each older daughter is assigned a younger child to mother. It's gross and lazy and deeply triggering to watch as an oldest daughter. Man, us oldest daughters go through some shit, honestly. Also, they made them dress like this in order to be, in quotes, modest. So like, hey, now. Okay, scene set. I want to talk about one specific issue in relation to the Duggars, but I mentioned her previously and I want to shout her out again. If you want a full breakdown of all the Duggar drama throughout the years, please go check out the YouTube channel Fun Day Fridays if you don't already. Jen and James over there have half a dozen hour-long videos on the subject, and they are a fun watch considering the horrid nature of the topic. This video could be 12 hours long if I had to explain every problematic element of the Duggars' lives. So Josh Duggar is the oldest child of Jim Bob and Michelle, arguably their favourite, definitely Jim Bob's favourite, and he is a horrible excuse for a human being. When Josh was a teenager, he sexually assaulted his sisters. His parents found this out, and then they continued to let him live in the house with the rest of the children. They forced their daughters to live in the same household as their abuser, whilst he had no consequences. Whilst airing and enforcing their apparently perfect Christian, God-fearing image on television, whilst letting Josh appear on the show, and whilst complimenting him constantly on how wonderful he was. The amount of smoke Michelle and Jim Bob blow up Josh's arse is insane, and they purposely hid his deviant and disturbing behaviour from their audience whilst doing so. They had the cameras follow Josh as he courted and got engaged to his wife Anna, knowing fully well all the disturbing things he had done to his sisters. They protected their one son, who Jim Bob had been grooming in an entirely different way for a life of conservative politics most of his life. They protected their one son over all of their daughters, because they are misogynistic child abusers. I have no nice way of cutting it. And they did all of this for so long that it would eventually come full circle to bite them in the arse. But not before Josh had acquired a long list of victims, in person and through the internet. When TLC got wind of Josh's behaviour and what had occurred behind doors in the Duggar home, they cancelled 19 Kids and Counting, and chose to offer the older girls of the family, all now women with husbands, their own show. The show was benign and it didn't last for long. However, TLC's decision to remove Josh and his parents from the network was not one they did to protect people from Josh's behaviour. Josh's behaviour was not morally repugnant enough to the higher-ups at TLC. That can be backed up with what happened to Jacob Roloff. It was simply an impending financial disaster if they had been seen to be complicit in the cover-up, which I personally think they were, but that's just my opinion on the matter. TLC did nothing to protect the girls of the Duggar family, and although as adults I have personal issues with each of their own views on society and politics, they did not deserve to have to deal with this as children. And because of the nature of reality television, they definitely did not deserve to have their abuse and their parents' cover-up be made public knowledge ripe for internet discussion, which I guess I'm kind of adding to now. TLC let this happen when they gave Jim Bob and Michelle a television show, knowing full well that they were going to use it as a platform to preach their anti-human rights, anti-social, conservative Christian propaganda.
The former reality TV star Josh Duggar is being charged with 2 counts of receiving and possessing material depicting the abuse of children. The alleged incidents happened in May of 2019, according to court documents. The 33-year-old has been accused of crimes before.
It took a while, but Josh finally got his comeuppance when he was arrested on serious CP charges in 2022. I won't go into detail, but the investigators said it was one of the worst collections of CP they had ever seen, and he was sentenced to almost 13 years in prison, 20 years probation after the fact, and a lifetime on the sex offenders registry. Last time I checked, he had got himself stuck in solitary confinement for using a phone in prison, because not only is he a predator, he is an idiot. Jim Bob and Michelle supported him throughout the entire process, and up until his trial, essentially claimed Josh's innocence, even though they knew of his history and had covered it up previously. They suck. I have nothing nice to say, nothing academic. Jim Bob and Michelle are the perfect example of all the horrors I worry about accidentally supporting by being a former member of their audience. I am glad I didn't continue with this show as an adult. I feel like I can mildly blame my watching on being a child at the time. Rancid, horrible people, and I'm glad their show is cancelled, and I hope all of the Duggars fame recedes into oblivion because not a single one of them has anything good to offer the general public. Another classic mage interlude, because there is so much to say and so little time. There were a lot of shows that I debated picking to use as examples for this video. I decided to narrow it down to TLC, partly because it made the selection process easier, and partly because I think they may be the longest standing offenders when it comes to the issues I have mentioned in this video, specifically when it comes to not protecting the children they put on television. Their track record is awful. However, they are not the only television channel that has these issues, and these shows are not the only shows. So I want to very quickly run through a few more shows that didn't make it into the larger sections of this video and briefly talk about how they too, TLC or otherwise, treat children terribly. Let's make it a list to keep it short, and please remember that there are even more shows out there with similar issues, even if I don't mention them. In fact, consider letting me know below about any I did forget to mention. Let me know all about your dirty reality TV obsessions, please. 1. John and Kate Plus 8, a show that followed the Gosselin family as they neglected their children, quite literally, on TV. I always remember clearly watching one of their children beg for water between interviews on TV and being denied it in order for the interview to continue. Although Kate herself, the mother, had time to drink, she denied any to her kids. One of their children, Colin, was treated terribly, and his mother sent him to one of those weird behaviour camps the US has because she believed he had behavioural issues. Actively abusive, Kate was definitely the perpetrator of the worst treatment of the children, and absolutely chose to put the pursuit of money and fame before their needs. 2. 16 in Prison, and its subsequent spin-off Teen Mum and Teen Mum 2 on MTV. Teen Mum not only takes advantage of young women in vulnerable positions for views and for money, it also forces their babies into being marketable commodities due to the nature of the whole show, usually before they're even born. They have shown abuse at every level on Teen Mum, to the women themselves, from their parents and their partners, and from the women to their own children. The whole show is just one massive expression of the cycles of abuse, drug addiction, bad parenting, and poverty in most cases. TLC's rip-off of the show, Unexpected, also contains its own fair share of abuse. Abusive arsehole boyfriends, to be specific. 3. Dance Mums. Need I say more? Probably not, but I will. Dance Mums was a show focusing on, well, dance mums. Overbearing middle-class parents who forced their daughters into a boot camp-esque dance school run by a woman called Abby Lee Miller, who was actively abusive to all the kids and loved stirring up drama between the parents at every opportunity possible. She also got done for tax evasion at one point, I believe, and spent some time in prison for it. 4. Obviously, Toddlers and Tiaras, with its sexualization of children and its mocking of poor kids and their desperate, neglectful parents. 5. Geordie Shore, waiting for girls to turn 18 and then essentially turning them into porn stars the moment they do is not cool, it's creepy. Insert any of the Shores here, but I watch Geordie Shore because I'm English. 6. The Willis Clan. That was a show that briefly aired on TLC a while back, where the father of said family was abusing his children the entire time. God, I hate all of this.
I think you want to reconsider your behavior.
Alright, strap in guys, because this was the whole reason I really wanted to make this video, and I'm about to rant big time. Sister Wives first aired on TLC in 2010 and follows the ups, but mostly downs, of the Brown family. Father, Cody, and his 4 wives. Yeah, 4. Mary, his first wife, Janelle, his second, Christine, his third, and Robin, the 4th. The first season of the show follows Cody and his first 3 wives as they welcome a 4th into their family. The rest of the show follows as the family move across the country more times than I can count, attempt to raise their literal horde of children, all 18 of them, and as Cody's first 3 wives leave him one by one. And damn, this show is like crap to me. I first discovered it on Netflix just after it started airing when I was depressed once, and I was hooked. I've seen every episode multiple times because I make people watch it, and I stalk the subreddit way too often. It's a goddamn shit show over there. It's just my show, you know? The show on this list I would choose to watch over all the other shows, even though I dislike almost everyone involved and everything about it. And out of all the shows on this list, Sister Wives definitely, I guess, feels like the least offensive in a lot of ways. At least it started that way. So, context. As I said, Sister Wives follows the Brown family, who are fundamentalist Mormons, once members of the AUB church, not the LDS, and obviously they're polygamists. AUB stands for the Apostolic United Brethren, and in Mormon fundamentalist circles, the AUB are generally considered more liberal than other sects. They aren't liberal at all, but they are more so than other Mormons, you know? Each member of the parental family has a pretty interesting character within themselves, and I think it's important to get to know them in order for a lot of what I'm going to discuss going forward to make sense. Firstly, there is Cody, our patriarch, who would like you to think he is a loyal husband, involved father, and perpetual golden retriever. He is not any of those things, but we'll discuss that as we go on. Cody is a man-child, for lack of a better term, and he is admitted as such on many occasions. He is a man with a large capacity to love, but to also hate and neglect. He sells tacky gun parts for a living, and constantly has ideas for new startups that are going to make him millions, and none of them ever do. Cody was not raised as a polygamous child. His parents converted to polygamy whilst he was away on a mainstream Mormon mission as a teenager. When he returned, he found his parents had converted, and he married a girl who had been raised in the practice, then under his parents' encouragement. And that woman, was Mary, the first wife, and the disciplinarian of the family when it comes to the children, and weirdly, sometimes the other wives. Mary is, and I hope this doesn't sound too mean, perpetually sad. Clearly desperate for Cody's love and never having enough of it. Out of the first 3 wives, she is the odd one out. Considered sometimes abrasive, controlling, and too much emotionally for a lot of the other family members. She has had quite a journey over the years and has a lot of trauma around the fact she was unable to have more than one child, whilst the other wives have 5 or 6 each, which is pretty reasonable given the culture in which she was raised and then went to live in for most of her adult life, a culture in which a woman's ability to have many children makes her more worthy. Janelle is the second wife, and she is by far my favourite. She was, rather awkwardly in my opinion, married to Mary's brother before marrying Mary's husband. And naturally, Janelle and Mary have their tension. Janelle is both strong-minded and incredibly laid back. She is the glorified husband of the family when Cody is busy being their firstborn son. She fills a lot of the roles that are usually reserved for men in fundamentalist circles. She works, and has always worked a lot, and she is the person in charge of the family finances. She seems like the only one with a personality sometimes, which sounds harsh, but is very true. She likes stargazing and heavy metal. Janelle was also not raised in the faith. She met Mary and Cody back in the day, and clearly fancied Cody from the offset. Married Mary's brother, too, big in my opinion disclaimer. She married Mary's brother in order to stay close to the family, eventually divorcing him and becoming Cody's second wife, without ever bonding with his first one. Like I said, Mary and Janelle have their issues. We've had the joy of watching them painstakingly try to hash them out in therapy to literally no avail. Imagine being in a polygamous relationship with someone for 25 years and not liking them. Watching that play out on screen is as painful as you'd imagine. The third wife is Christine, the linchpin of the family, the capstone, the great unifier. Christine is bubbly and emotional, but not in the hard work way the family considers Mary to be emotional. And if Janelle is the assigned husband of the family, then Christine is the assigned wife. And obviously, when they have 17 damn children, the mother. Mary only has one child, but Janelle and Christine have 6 each, all of whom are close in age and all of whom were raised as a troop. Janelle and Christine arguably had the only true functioning marriage of any of the adults in this family. Christine would stay home with the kids, doing the old Christian homeschool, although eventually all of their children ended up in mainstream school, and Janelle would work long hours, bringing home money. All of the kids considered all of the mums their mums, through politeness, if nothing else. But Christine really is all of Janelle's children's second parent, and even in adulthood, their bond with her is strong, and Janelle has an equally strong relationship with Christine's children. Cody didn't really marry Christine for love. He admits that now, even though he wouldn't in the beginning of the show. He married Christine because she is what they all refer to as polygamist royalty. Her great-grandfather was the founder of the AUB branch of Mormonism, and that made her an important person in the church, meaning that he was not really in a position to not marry Christine, when she had pretty much decided, as a teenager, that she was going to join his family. Fourth wife, who's courting into the family is why the show exists, is Robin. Robin is 10 years younger than the other wives, and she has children that biologically aren't Cody's. She joined the family about a year or so after divorcing her first husband, who by all accounts sounds like a douchebag. And Robin is a lot. She gets a lot of hatred online, partly because a lot of people are misogynistic and see her as Cody's mistress and act as if the family had no issues before her arrival, but also partly because she is weepy, annoying, and definitely a little manipulative sometimes. At least that's how the edit of the show plays it. She is also definitely Cody's favourite, and now only, wife. But I would argue that's a Cody problem, not a Robin one. Mary legally divorced Cody a few years after Robin joined the family, so Cody could legally adopt the children that were not biologically his. And honestly, that was probably one of the biggest indicators that the Browns were driving their marriage into a wall. It was a good thing that Mary did, and it provided stability for the children. If anything happened to Robin, the man that had raised them most of their life would have parental rights over them. But as far as the adult relationships go, or went, it was a catalyst of sorts. So yeah, those are the parents of the Brown household, and hopefully a little context on their dynamics. It's important to note that these people were either raised in a cult, essentially, or joined AUB as an incredibly young, barely legal adult. This has undoubtedly impacted their lives and their children's lives a lot. And these guys may not be FLDS. If you don't know what that is, I'll get into it. But polygamy in Utah is basically a cult. Cult-like, at least, in the same way a lot of evangelical or fundamentalist sects can be. The Browns have a big and potentially dangerous habit of presenting their situation as a normal one, not one originally inspired by misogynistic and religiously warped ideas. My point being, reflection is not the Browns' strong point, especially when it comes to how Mormonism has led every major decision in their lives. As Brenda R. Weber discusses in a chapter of her book, Latter-day Screens, Gender, Sexuality, and Mediated Mormonism, specifically commenting on a viewing of the first episode of Sister Wives, the message is both overtly and covertly uttered. Cody is no Warren Jeffs, the infamous leader of the FLDS, who in 2012 was convicted for arranging marriages between adult men and underage girls, as well as sexual misconduct, including rape and incest. Indeed, at a public forum held at Tufts University that was also folded into an episode of Sister Wives, Robin notes, in tears, "We don't believe in child brides. We don't believe in forcing marriages. I was so upset. I just wanted to rescue every girl. I think Warren Jeffs deserves to rot in hell. I really do." Bad polygamy exists, the Browns concede, but so does good. And in that difference, and oversimplified dichotomy, modern polygamy looks a lot like normal. But normalcy, as we know, is complicated. And the normalcy of the Browns is complicated, especially for their children, most of whom don't remember much of their lives before television became a part of it. So let's talk about them and the visceral messiness of their lives that were projected for all to see. And I'm going to quickly run through all the kids and assign them to groups based on their biological mother, but a small note is that in the Brown family, the children are often more grouped together by age than by biology. There is a definitive line between the older kids, the middle kids, and the younger kids. So first wife Mary only has one child, Leon, who is trans non-binary specifically, I believe. Leon was the first child of the Browns to come out, first as gay and then trans. Janelle's children are Logan, the firstborn of the family, Madison, Hunter, Garrison, Gabriel, and Savannah. Christine has Aspen, McKelty, Payden, Gwendolyn, Isabel, and Truly. Robin has Dayton, Aurora, Brianna, Solomon, and Ariella. Considering they are children that grew up on TV, most of the Brown kids are pretty average. A few are a little conservative for my personal liking, but all things considered, they are mostly doing pretty well. Except Payden, who sucks, I'm sorry. Now, as the title of this section supposes, one of the things I find fascinating about the Browns is their ability to lie for decades, perhaps even to themselves, and definitely to their audience. The Browns would look to, at least for the first, say, 10 seasons of the show, consider themselves a nice, normal, loving family. But repeated watches of Sister Wives and the current unravelling of the Browns says clearly that they are anything but. Or at least, they are a normal family in the way that every family is inherently dysfunctional. Back in the earlier days, the wives were constantly peddling their happiness, trying to prove, again to themselves or their audience, it's hard to say, how much choice they have, how much they love not having their husband around on a daily basis, how much they liked each other's company, how great they are as parents, and how wonderful a father and husband Cody is. All of these things are constantly pushed in the narrative of Sister Wives, but very rarely shown to be true.
Is it love? At this point, no. It's not. It's duty, it's commitment, it's a faith that tells you you work it out and stick it out.
Mm-hmm. The Browns are not bad parents. They are incredibly average in their dysfunction, as I mentioned. But they are not honest about this fact, and they are often collectively ignorant to the damage and rifts they cause in their own family, especially amongst their own children. It is as if they are so obsessed with presenting their lifestyle as joyful that they actually forget to be joyful. An example of the Browns' inability to see any potential issues they cause and to see good where there is bad comes pretty early in the show. Logan, Janelle and Cody's firstborn son, is truly the perfect son and older brother. He cares deeply for his siblings, and does, and did, everything he could to support all of them throughout his time on the show. Like 3 out of 4 of the Roloff children, many of the Brown kids would distance themselves from the show as they grew older, and more confident in their place in the world outside of their family. Logan did that. Logan is good. He is smart and sweet, and he works really hard. And he has gone on to marry his college sweetheart, who is just as smart and sweet as he is. Unfortunately for Logan, and I feel like this has a lot to do with the adult distance he has chosen to put between himself and his family, Logan was the pack mule for the Browns for a long time. In the first ever episode of Sister Wives, we see Logan, 15 at the time, raising all of his biological siblings from their slumber, feeding them all a cooked breakfast, and making sure they were all ready to get off to school. He is in this position because his mother began work early, and none of the other 3, at the time, later it would become 4, parents could be bothered to fulfill any parental role in the morning, whilst Janelle was at work. Cody is always somewhere else, never where his children need him. Christine had 6 children of her own, and she would have Janelle's kids after school, so slightly more reasonable. Robin had yet to officially join the family, and Mary was essentially just sat in another room worrying about her one biological child, whilst Logan acted as a parent to 5. This is a really visual and honestly sad representation of parentification, and the burdening of a child with adult responsibilities.
This is pretty much how it goes.
And the Browns, the adults, when we cut to them later discussing it on the producer's sofa in a talking head, they think it's cute. They talk about how Logan takes on too much responsibility, about how he doesn't know how to chill out and how he is just so reliable. None of them ever stop to think about how this parentification, that is not a choice, no matter how the parents wish to paint it, could and would later have adverse effects on Logan. Logan, even though he is the oldest Brown child, is one of the few Brown older children who hasn't gone on to have his own children, and he has briefly discussed not knowing if he ever will. He clearly did a lot of parenting in his younger years, whilst not being parented himself, and this clearly messed him up in that department. He has spent his adult years just learning how to be himself, without the attachment, without the burden of responsibility that he never asked for. And there are a lot of these moments throughout Sister Wives, where the Brown parents are ignorant to the issues surrounding their children, yet are willing to put them on TV in order to present a certain image to the world. It's really, gaslighty. God, I actually hate that word, but it is cognitive dissonance at its finest, with the Browns clearly acting one way but telling us all they're acting another. There are other instances with other Brown children that are either just crappy parenting on behalf of the adults, or are, I guess the best way to put it, played down. And this has had dire consequences, almost deadly in one particular case.
Christine just sent a text saying that she is taking Truly to the emergency room at Summerlin Hospital.
Are you serious? What?
In season 4 of the show, we follow the Browns as they face one of the worst situations any parent can face when 3-year-old Truly, biological youngest of Christine and Cody, almost dies from kidney failure. And this is a sensitive subject with a lot of nuance, but there was an element of neglect to this incident. Like I said, Truly was 3 at the time, and Christine and the other wives had gone out of town, leaving Cody with his children, which actually meant leaving the oldest kids in charge of the younger children, and with Cody flailing and failing between them all. And I mean, almost 24 kids is a lot to look after, but he is their father. He made the choice for them to exist, and when he's needed the most, he struggles to be present. That is why 4 wives and no contraception may not be the brightest idea, Mr. Brown. I digress. So, Christine is away, and Cody is flapping, and this means that Aspen and McKelty were left in charge of Truly, who got ill. The kids did their best, but they didn't know what was going on, and Cody was just not around, even though this was his watch. When Christine returned home, and was definitely not informed properly by Cody about how sick Truly was, probably because he didn't notice Truly was not eating, drinking, or playing, it wasn't until Christine had been back for a day and she saw Truly going cross-eyed whilst being incredibly lethargic that she realised how bad things could be. Even then, she only took her to the local practitioner, who instantly recognised how dire the situation was and had Truly rushed to the emergency room, where it was revealed that after a fever and severe dehydration, her kidneys had gone into a total failure. It was a really harrowing watch at the time, and a great example of how the Browns get so distracted making a TV show to prove that polygamy is fun and all of their marriages are great. I mean, Christine and the rest of the wives were literally away from home in order to organise a party they were holding for the sake of the cameras, and Cody was showboating as they did it. They spend so much time distracted by the dream, one that crashed and burned because literally all the wives but Robin left Cody at the point of me recording this, that one of their children almost died. And that is the most explicit example of the kind of neglect, even when not purposeful, I can find in this show. There are many moments such as that, however, like encouraging their daughter, Madison, to give birth on camera and not in a hospital, and then that baby having to be rushed to ICU and the whole thing being caught on film. Or when their daughter Isabel needed spinal surgery and Cody just thought it wasn't important. Or when he kicked their sons out of their home as teenagers because they dared to stand up to him, and then we had to watch one of them breaking down on the talking head sofa about how Cody forgot his birthday, after years of watching Cody proclaim that nobody in his family had their birthday forgotten. Or all the times Mary used Leon as her personal therapist, whether it was related to Mary's infertility or her affair, because Mary kind of had an affair, another story for another day. And Leon's emotions were filmed up close and personal. The list is kind of endless. I mean, even a few weeks ago, Christine and Cody's daughter discussed on her own YouTube channel how when she came out to her family as bisexual, Robin told her to save it for the cameras. The Browns are so desperate to be seen as relatable in their lives that they exploit their children in the process. Lucky for them, they have pretty good kids, who have all taken a step back as they have gotten older, or stayed if that is what's made them happy. But this all still happened. I mean, poor Truly is literally born in the first episode of the show. We see her as a sick toddler, and as she grows into a clearly neurodiverse, in my opinion, child. Her entire life and emotions are made into entertainment. When Christine decided to divorce Cody last season, Truly's reactions and emotions were fair game. They even made her do a talking head where the producers asked her about how she felt about her parents splitting up. She was 12 years old. Honestly, there are so many moments of the Brown children's lives I can think of that should not have been filmed, just like with all of the kids I've discussed in this video. Again, as I said with the Duggars, this video would be 10 hours long if I tried to name them all individually. The only real solace that can be found in it is, as I said, the ability for the Brown kids to step back as grown-ups and realise that they don't have to be on screen if they don't want to be. For the kids that do not mind being on screen, they have been able to carve their own space because of social media. A tool often used to make their lives hard through audience input now provides them with a voice. A few of the kids do YouTube and Patreon, where they openly talk about their show, their parents, and their experiences growing up on TLC. It's cheaper than therapy, and it also allows them to consent to and control what they need to in order to be happy adults. Actually, there is also solace in the fact that Cody is now monogamous. The experiment failed, and Mary, Janelle, and Christine are free to enjoy their lives with their children without the charade of patriarchal polygamy haunting their narrative. Yeah, I really could talk about this show forever, but I won't. I could easily talk for hours simply about the reframing of polygamy in the show, something I've only briefly touched on here. How the adults in the family constantly act as if their fight for polygamy, a patriarchal and religious lifestyle choice, is somehow comparative to the very real fight for LGBT rights. These people clearly think they live in big love, and it irks me. I'm a big proponent of having the right to make your own stupid choices in life, but to compare a patriarchal religious system that has led to the abuse of women and children for decades to the fight for equal rights in an LGBT sense annoys the crap out of me. Anyway, Cody Brown sucks, he is a man-child and an asshole, and I hope all of his kids find happiness away from the mini cult he created around himself. Let's wrap this video up because I have hit 13k words already and it will probably be 14 before I finish this, and it's all just getting a little ridiculous. The point of this video was not to simply judge people's parenting abilities, although I'm sure it might have felt that way at times, but it was more to analyse and recognise how I often feel complicit in terrible childhoods by watching them unfold on screen. I am one person. I cannot take on TLC, and nor do I really want to. There can be value in these shows sometimes, just as there is harm, but the fact regardless is that the children on these shows are often negatively affected by their production. These children are made timeless, fixed in place and served up as characters to be judged by a wider audience because, well, their parents want something. Money, fame, acceptance. Whatever the reason the parents have, the consequences remain the same. And sometimes those consequences are beyond the pale. They are truly dangerous. And I hope that with this video, I have opened up the ability to discuss that with you all. I hope that this video can be seen as a bridge to understanding that there is a lot of nuance involved when it comes to children living on screen. No parent is perfect, and I am not one myself yet, so I cannot always fairly comment on how these people parent. I also don't know any of these people personally, only through a parasocial experience of being pulled into their lives through a lens. And the camera is an eye. It can bring us closer to these people and their experiences. There is no doubt about that. However, it can also be a barrier. The camera is not always there, and what happens off camera is just as important, sometimes more so than what happens on camera. Again, all of that is true, but the very real consequence for those too young to understand consent is also true. And it's complicated. What is sacrificed in the name of entertainment? Entertainment that often wishes to be seen as truth, even though we all know a lot of it isn't. Whilst commenting on a book by Patricia Holland, Picturing Childhood, The Myth of the Child in Popular Imagery, Lucia Palmer discusses this nuance and why we are so drawn to these kinds of shows. In her own essay, Sluts, Brats and Sextuplets, The Dangers of Reality Television for Children and Teen Participants. Drawing from Holland's concepts of public imagery, reality television can be seen as a media form that extracts visuals and narratives from archives of established meaning to discursively construct and reinforce hegemonic norms of gender, childhood, and family. The frequent recurrence of televisual representation of families and children have created an archive of familiar archetypal characters: the doting mother, the rebellious teenager, the rambunctious child, and narratives: teen romance, the American dream, family struggles. Drawing from this archive creates familiarity in reality television programs that function to incorporate its programming into the daily routines of its audience. These routine images and themes may not be created with sinister intentions, but regardless of intent, their repetition amalgamates and has material hegemonic effects on society. Television is an especially potent media form because it combines habitual images with conventional storylines, familiarizing itself through its use of established narratives and meanings. The stories and images of reality television are naturalized even more because they are presented and thus legitimated as a neutral presentation of the truth. There is comfort in familiarity, in archetypes, but there is also danger, a risk of complicity in the social norms that betray us, in the notion that we are simply watching the world happen and that we cannot do much to change it. And ultimately, that has been the point I've wanted to make the most today, that we are all responsible for what we do. I am responsible for what I choose to consume. The parents of the children talked about today are responsible for putting those children in the positions they are in. And ultimately, TLC is responsible for what it chooses to put into the world. I would argue TLC is ultimately responsible for creating these situations for the purpose of, like Palmer commented, the keeping up of hegemonic norms, and as Jacob Roloff earlier commented, for capitalistic gain. Thank you so much for watching this video. I am truly impressed if you've managed to stick it all the way through. It's a long one and not necessarily what I usually cover, so again, I really appreciate you sticking with it if you have. My name is Mage, this is Black and White Thinking. If you want to catch me, check out the links below, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.